Before we dive in, here's another show you can enjoy in the True Story FM family of entertainment podcasts.
Meet Zinnia.
You are being very polite to someone who is attempting to kill us.
Her wife, Saffron.
You know I'm wildly, madly in love with you.
And their best friend, Goldie.
Glad we didn't miss all the fun.
Swords in hand, they defend their city from the worst of humanity.
I am Lord Buxton Blue.
Equity Electric.
Herr Haig. Virgil Walcott. Vicious Suave.
Follow their adventures on the Swashbuckling Ladies Debate Society audio drama podcast. Available now at truestory.fm/swashbuckling.
What's up, most excellent friends?
It's Chrissy and Nathan from the Most Excellent 80s Movies podcast.
It's a podcast where a filmmaker and a comedian
And their most excellent guests
adventure their way through the 80s movies we think we love
or might have missed
with our grown-up eyes to see how they hold up.
Join us for delightful discussion,
Rollicking recaps.
ratings, and deep-cut recommendations.
Plus, members get some extra fun chit-chat with the hosts after the show.
Download the Most Excellent 80s Movies podcast today at truestory.fm.
Or find it wherever the finest podcasts are stored.
And do remember to keep the Most Excellent 80s Movies podcast motto in mind.
Be excellent to each other and...
Party on.
Party on, dudes.
Hello and welcome to this episode of the Star Wars Generations podcast. I'm Matthew, your host. I'm joined by Erin, one of my co-hosts, and we're really excited today. We're going to be wrapping up Skeleton Crew. We're going to be talking about kind of our thoughts on the whole series. We're going to be going into a lot of your listener feedback. This is probably not the last time we'll talk about Skeleton Crew, but this is going to be kind of our wrap-up episode of that sort of thing. Wanting also to let you know, though, that Alex sadly cannot join us, but he will be with us, of course, for following weeks. We had to schedule some things around some of my medical stuff this week. I do also want to take a moment, though, to say kind of a more general comment about this podcast and the world we're in right now. I'm recording this today on January 21st, Tuesday, a day after here in the United States we celebrated Martin Luther King, and also a day after the inauguration of our new President Trump. And one of the many things that happened on that day was a lot of executive orders were issued that scared the heck out of a lot of people, myself included, because now, according to the federal government, my gender doesn't exist, and the gender identities of a whole lot of my friends no longer exist, and the safety of a lot of immigrant folks I know and folks like that are really in danger. And there are folks out there who may disagree with me politically on those things, and that's totally fine. But I have to tell you that when I was really scared listening to all of this, what I did was I turned on Star Wars. Because Star Wars has, for me, always been one of the places I go to when I'm afraid, particularly when it seems like everyone's against me. And there are moments like when, Leia realizes that no one else is coming to help, or when, it feels like Luke is all alone. That moment's of feeling like the whole country, the whole world, like everyone is out to get you. You go on social media and it seems like there's just so much hate directed towards trans folks and immigrants and women making and people making reproductive choices and any of the rest of it. And I know sometimes, some folks will even try and make Star Wars into against those things. And for me, Star Wars is always the most woke piece of media I've ever found and will continue to be. And that's always going to be the perspective of me on this podcast, that I'm here for the wokeness. I love the wokeness of Star Wars. I love that Star Wars has a message against empire, a message of that a small band of rebels, even if everyone thinks they're wrong, even if everyone thinks that Jin should just give up, that there's too many out there. That's a feeling a lot of us can have too. And if Star Wars and this podcast and anything like that can be a small ray of hope, a small ray of escapism to help remember that, there are other good things out there, but then also a means of remembering, like none of us can strap into an X-Wing, but there's lots of other ways we can help to make this world a better place and help to keep this country from becoming a worse place and the world a worse place. Then I hope that happens, and that for me is very much a part of what this podcast is all about.
Yeah, I second that. I mean, today I had therapy. Love therapy. Shouts out.
Mm-hmm.
And my therapist asked how I was feeling after the inauguration. And I said, all I can think about is that Jyn Erso quote, where Saw Gerrera asks her, you can really stand to see the Imperial flag reign across the galaxy. And she just said, it's not a problem if you don't look up. Because that's like the shitty thing is like, what can you do when politics and government isn't going the way you wanted? Like, sorry guys, I'm getting emotional, but this election actually kind of forced my hand to make a reproductive medical decision that I wasn't planning to make this year. But I wanted to be able to do what I need to do for myself when I had the choice.
Yeah.
And so I'm really grateful that Minnesota is a state where I could get that done without needing the, approval of a man in my life. And that's not the rights that many women have across this country. And that's fucked up. It just is, It's not cool to have the government make you feel like you have to behave a certain way because your rights are going to be taken away. So I understand that not everyone listening to this agrees with us, and that's okay. You can have different points of view if you don't, especially both Matthew and I are part of the LGBTQIA community, and that is a very big topic with this election specifically. And so that feels harder and bigger for us than it probably does for a lot of people who are cisgendered and straight. And that's okay if you don't see it our way, but I still like using our platform to say, even when shit's hard, Star Wars gets it, right?
Yeah, I mean, some of the best representation I've seen of bi people, of asexual people, of people all over gender maps is happening right now in Star Wars books, and it's just, I just want to say that for those of you out there who are feeling, and also how much of Bad Batch was about immigrants being, helping refugees, helping people find safe places they could go in war, in danger, in all the kind of issues that we see in our own world. We're not going to turn this into a politics podcast, but Star Wars has been political ever since George Lucas based the rebels in part on the Viet Cong and the Empire on America. And so we're just going to keep that up. And, I just want to let people know that I do know a lot of other podcasts are going to be, a lot of other media is trying to be like, well, given the changing tides in this country, let's change with them. We're not going to. This is who we are. This is what Star Wars always has been. Star Wars is woke. We are woke, and we love that. So with that, let's now talk about overall Skeleton Crew, which is kind of funny because Skeleton Crew is fantastic and great. And I think a lot of us loved it, in part because it was one of the least raising big issues kind of shows, and that's okay. Erin, overall, what'd you think about Skeleton Crew?
I loved it. It was so lovely. I talk about my parents all the time on this podcast, and I'm going to continue. Okay. But a big thing about this show was that it brought back what Star Wars was to me when I was younger, which was that we could fully enjoy it together, because I have pretty differing views from my parents, my dad specifically, and watching shows like Andor and shows like The Acolyte it's tougher, we don't agree on things. He's upset about things that maybe I'm excited to see in the media. And so it makes it tougher to have just like a pure familial enjoyment experience. And I love that Skeleton Crew gave us that back again. And we were able to just have this lighthearted kind of fun show that had important themes and important things. I mean, we got an episode that really dives into like disabilities, and that's fucking awesome. We don't see that a lot in media. And it did it in such a beautiful and subtle way that if you don't have a disability, maybe you wouldn't catch it. And I kind of think that's beautiful, is that it speaks to the people it needs to, and it's not in the face of people who don't understand it.
Yeah.
So yeah, I really liked this show overall for just I feel like the joy it brought. What were your thoughts overall?
Yeah, I think so. And I think kind of building on what you were just saying, like, I love Andor, and I thought Acolyte did a lot of things really well. And I'm really glad that Star Wars made both of those shows, and both of those shows are very heavy. And both of those shows very clearly are dealing with a lot of real world issues. And I want my Star Wars to include that, but I also want it to include Skeleton Crew, and I think that I see a lot of stuff online about like, oh, it should all be like Skeleton Crew, or no, Skeleton Crew is bad, it should all be like Andor. I want there to be all of it, because you're right. It's not that the show said we're not going to touch on any issues. There's an extent to which I think there's no such thing. Like, all media is making commentary, even if it's all it's doing is upholding a status quo. that's still a commentary and that's still staking out a position. But the fact that there was just so much joy in the show and so much whimsy and so much, like, the stakes were high, but you always kind of knew they weren't that high. There was always just a sense of like things are going to be okay that you don't have in a lot of Star Wars shows, and that I don't always want in a lot of Star Wars shows. But in this, it just felt so perfect, and it, more than anything, it made me feel like I am glad that we can have a Star Wars universe at this point that's big enough that it can encompass all these different kinds of media and all these different tones, because I think we need all of it. And I think I wound up loving Skeleton Crew. I didn't know if I did, but even before I wound up loving it, I definitely had a moment of like, even if this isn't for me, I'm really glad it's for other people. As it turned out, it was
Yeah.
for me as well. But I think that's the other most important thing, is just we can be at a point now where Star Wars can have something for everybody, and not everything is for all of us, and that's okay too.
Yeah, I like what you said about kind of like the stakes of the show, because never once in the show did I think a main character was going to die.
Yeah.
Like, there was no question on whether or not those kids were going to make it through the show, because just from the setup of the show, you knew that
Yeah.
just isn't where this was going. There was no way that was going to be a part of the storyline. Like, these children are dealing with a lot of other hard topics. They don't need to also deal with death, you know?
Right.
And so I really loved the stark difference, especially like compared to The Acolyte. I loved that show. I really enjoyed it. But holy shit, the gut punch of losing every single main character except for 3
Yeah.
was diabolical.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I loved the difference in the show where when KB crashes and Fern screams and Jod says, "It wasn't supposed to go like this. I didn't want to hurt anybody." Deep down, I knew she was okay.
Yeah.
I knew that her and 33 did some crazy Anakin Skywalker crash landing, you know?
I mean, for me, honestly, the scariest moment that where I thought like, oh wow, this would be really intense, where it felt like it would kind of break the stakes, but I could believe it could happen. This is one that Alex and I talked about, that one of you saw the same way. When Wim is holding the lightsaber and Jod is trying to use the Force to pull it out of his hand, I thought that like Wim was going to activate the lightsaber and wind up like stabbing Jod without meaning to, and like I was like, oh.
Oh
So you're
shit.
saying that the stakes are this kid won't like die, but at 10 years old, he's gonna murder someone, and that's gonna be on his
Oh my
conscience,
God.
bro. Like, yeah, I was like, that's gonna screw that kid up real bad. But happily they didn't do that, which I was very relieved about. But yeah, other than that, like the show I think did this perfect walking of a line, in that it was kind of like a roller coaster where like it makes you feel afraid, but in the back of your mind, you always know that you're safe enough that you don't completely freak out. In the back of my mind, I always knew that the kids weren't going to die, but I also believed that the kids didn't know that. That the kid, like, I felt like I could see the moment where the
Yeah.
kids went from that childhood sense of invulnerability to actually realizing, wait a minute, we're way over our heads. We could actually die. This could be terrible. And I just really credit the writing and the acting of all the kid actors, because it pulled that off.
Yeah. Yeah, we had some really impressive performances. There was never a moment in this show where I felt like bad acting or like a misportrayal of the character pulled me out of it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's very true. It's very true. Let's talk about Jod, because that was one we were talking about all season long, about was he going to turn into a good guy all along? Was he did he have this secret nefarious plan? Was he a Jedi? Was he not? They kind of just picked they kind of didn't go to any of those extremes. They just let him be a villain, but without him being like mwahaha evil, but also not giving him redemption. And they said that he was like loosely connected to the Jedi, and that's how he learned about the Force. But he wasn't a Padawan. He wasn't Order 66. He was just a guy. What do you think of what they did with his character?
I think I liked it in the end. It was interesting because going into the last episode, I had kind of these expectations or hopes of what we would learn about Jod. And I feel like that was not fulfilled. But when the episode ended, I didn't feel like I was missing something.
Yeah.
I think I was expecting them to flesh it out more, but I'm also just really happy with where it ended, of like, like you said, he's kind of just a guy, and he's got
Yeah.
really understandable and really human things driving him, and some, prejudices against these kids who haven't had a hard life like he did, and how it comes out
Right.
sideways, where now you're threatening to carve up their parents, but you claim you never wanted to hurt anybody, and that just
Yeah.
got away from you. And I think, yeah, he was a really human character, and I really liked having the one guy, that everyone's been championing Jude Law as like the main character, or like the big guy in the show. And I feel like we all, or I at least going into the show, had this concept or thought that like, oh yeah, he's gonna come in and save the kids. And I
Uh-huh.
like that it started that way and it divulged into an actual, like, really human character and a really understandable character. And I liked that we didn't see any grand death or him being arrested or anything. It's just like, well, he failed and now the real good guys are coming, so that sucks.
Yeah. I think it's so true, and I think there's a real tendency, especially in Star Wars, because this is kind of where we started. I think I think that's so true, and I think for me, Star Wars has always been about the idea of moral grayness and that there is possibility of redemption and all of this kind of stuff. And I think that's really true, but I think this is somewhat true, especially of the earliest Star Wars stuff, the original trilogy that I love, but that it's easy to kind of see the world as truly evil, unredeemable people or heroic people who have made mistakes, but they can be redeemed and they're good. And then everyone is kind of one or the other. And I was seeing some stuff about like either A, kind of taking the position of like either A, Jod should have been a villain, which meant that he wouldn't have any remorse whatsoever, or that B, Jod wasn't a villain, and so he should have gotten a redemption arc. And the reality is, lots of people are not that simple. That, as you said, Jod wasn't a cookie cutter. Yeah, he wasn't a cardboard. That, as you said, Jod wasn't a cardboard cutout. He was just a guy who had a lot of motivations for what he did and had a lot of reasons why he was willing to sort of be cruel and be terrible, and he was very jaded and cynical and willing to kind of screw over other people and was willing to murder people. Like Brutus was not posing any danger. There was no self-defense. He just straight up murked Brutus, I'm sorry. But at the same time, he genuinely didn't want to harm the kids. And he wanted to scare the hell out of them. But he generally believed that he wasn't going to hurt the kids. And probably, as he said, kind of let himself believe, like, which maybe wasn't very accurate. Because he wasn't just, mwahaha, power. He was trying to be a bad guy, but also had some lines he didn't want to cross. And I think that honestly, most villains, most people probably fall somewhere into those categories. And I really like that portrayal from him.
Yeah.
So what else about the show did you want to talk about? We got some listener feedback we'll jump into, but any other kind of points that you wanted to bring up or kind of overall things you loved or didn't love?
Let me check my notes. I will say I kind of liked how in this show we got like the mention. I mean, like in the first episode, or maybe it was the second episode, where the girls are pretending to be like something official, and they say, "What's the name of your crush?" And Neil's
Uh-huh.
like, "Ah, this person!" Like, I loved that we got the accuracy of like people their age having crushes, but it not being a big part of the show. And like, obviously, like Neil kind of had a crush on that girl, Hannah, because she's a badass and because she saw him for who he is and she saw his strength for what it is. And that like physical strength and defiancy isn't the only ways to be strong.
Right.
And I love that we have kind of this tension between like Fern and Wim of like, oh, are they just little kids fighting with each other because they think different things? Is there maybe a little crushing happening? Is there not? But it doesn't matter. Like it wasn't a big part of the show. And I
Yeah.
like that because I feel like oftentimes an aspect of storytelling is like the romance of it, and it's just kind of thrown in there. And that's something that I love that Star Wars doesn't always do. I mean, with my favorite character, Ahsoka, they had Lux Bonteri in the Clone Wars, but overall they never really paired her with anyone, and I love that.
Yeah.
And I really like how this show also just kind of had it like held space for that concept, but it didn't harp on it or anything like that.
Yeah, I think sometimes there's shows as there's like I think sometimes so the reaction to not wanting to be too romance focused is to be like aggressively platonic and like
Mhm.
no acknowledgement of that. When the reality is, yeah. And I think these kids are meant to be like prepubescent or like on the cusp of puberty. It's not that I think that they're like, raging hormones or anything, but they are at the age when like some of them may start to have crushes on each other and others don't. And others don't know what they're feeling and won't be like, "Oh, I had a crush," until like 20 years later. Um
Mhm.
and I appreciate that the way they played it, like, yeah, we could see that energy happening, but it wasn't a big deal, it just existed and it didn't take over the show and it didn't become like I never had a will they won't they moment. I never had a
Mhm.
like are Fern and Wim gonna kiss or like let their hands touch in a little like, oh, isn't that so cute? They're gonna grow up and start dating later kind of a way. It was just,
Yeah.
yeah, these are just the complex feelings that kids can have among each other.
Yeah, I feel like I don't know. There was a lot in this show that I loved. I liked the kind of different parenting setups that we had also.
Mhm.
I mean, we've got our single father, Wendell, with his
Yep.
microwavable homemade meals,
Yep.
which when I watched it with my parents and he goes, homemade, my mom went, ugh. And I was like, I'm glad you get it too. Like, I'm glad
Someone
you
else
caught
named
that.
that. Yeah.
Exactly. Um, and the dynamics between how it's different between Wim and Wendell versus Fern and Farah.
Mhm.
Um, and they're both single parents. Um, but yeah, neither of them really listen to their kids, but it comes
Yeah.
out in different ways. And I really
Mhm.
loved that at the end of the show, they did really listen.
They did, and yet it was still in very different ways. That for Wendell, it was, can he be a little more adventurous? Can he be willing to try something? Whereas for Fern's mom, it was, can she go against the authority? Can she,
Mhm.
not be the good little soldier, but actually listen and break the rules? And it was really beautiful, as well as it seemed like all of those parents were bonding and were connecting with each other. But again, and not to be like super anti-romance, like I love romance and stuff, but especially in stuff that is more kid aimed, sometimes it feels like they just throw in romances but with no buildup whatsoever. And like
Mhm.
there was a part of me going into it that was like, all right, are Wim's dad and Fern's mom gonna have like romantic, gazes at each other or something? And
Oh, okay.
no, there was none of
Mhm.
that. It was just these are
Yeah.
all parents who are not they're all just united by, the worry about their kids and the worry about their world and how they balance those out.
I will say I was always very curious where the fuck Neil's dad was. Because my boy was like never around. He was there in the hologram, but he like
Mhm.
never really had a speaking moment. So I was like, okay. But also what they had like 4 other kids. So somebody's
Yeah.
gotta watch the babies.
Someone's gotta babysit. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
All right, well, let's talk about some feedback we got. And the first one, we were getting some on our Discord, which I always encourage people to check out our Discords more. I'm in the process of kind of redoing our social media presence and trying to have a much more active presence. At first, I was like, oh gosh, we have to do this without TikTok. Now, of course, TikTok is maybe back. Who the hell knows? But we're gonna put out a lot more information about how to find us on social media, and of course, how to send us feedback. This is all going to come from our Discord, which there is a link to in the show notes. But you can find us on Discord, email, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok. Blue Sky is going to get started pretty soon. All sorts of ways to find us. But this comes to us. Most of these, 2 of these comments are from once the show was over, but one of them came, I think, after episode 3. And I'm very apologetic to Coruscano, who's been one of the most loyal fans of the show, always commenting on our Discord. And I love you for that, dude. Thank you so much for continuing to be a great fan. And he wrote in, I think, again, this was after like episode 3 or 4. I had a couple of thoughts I wanted to get your takes on. At Atten. What if At Atten is actually an empire-controlled world where the governor, minister, chancellor is someone who isn't ruthless for a change? What if it's a place where the empire has, as Matthew says, made the trains run on time? Empire wants the resources, and the administrator has an unusual approach. Instead of taking the resources, the empire gives the people purpose, income, so the natives give the resources away. Naturally, you'd have to shield the people from what the Empire is doing in every other area of the galaxy, so all the restrictions and lack of pushback from the characters are explained. Thoughts?
I like that concept of like, yeah, maybe it's the government that we all view as the big bad, but in this situation, yeah, it's working out okay. Like you said, the trains are running on time. People
Yeah.
go to work, they go home, they eat their meals, they're happy, they raise their kids. Um, I think that would have been a very interesting way to see it go.
Mm-hmm.
The one thing is the timeline of this show, I don't think would have made sense, but that early in the show, I don't think we knew how long Atten had been missing
Yeah.
for. Um, so that would be very interesting. And then it would be like, well, is that an imperial like remnant or a splinter? Is that someone who kind of said, I'm going to take my power and build it my own way, like a Thrawn type almost, using the power for and means to an end? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, when excuse me, in those first couple episodes, before we really learned everything, I definitely thought this was kind of what was happening. And not necessarily even that it was like the Empire or whatever, but that, you know, in a world where there's extreme poverty and extreme income disparity, or just there's an empire and like all the people who oppress the empire are being, horribly abused. Yeah, the people who take care of the empire are treated quite well. And in some ways, I was kind of thinking of it almost as like District 1 in the Hunger Games kind of thing, or the capital in the Hunger Games, and where it's not even the capital, but like because if we understand that in this world there's like the immense poverty, but then there's places like Canto Bight, there's going to be a suburbs. There's going to be a suburban world, and a lot of those kind of Goonies type movies that I really loved, one of the themes sometimes was kids in the suburbs realizing that not all kids have the privileges that they do. That not everyone gets to grow up on a safe street where the most difficult thing is, are you going to take the test that will get you into, one elite college or another? And that's kind of where I thought we were going, was that this was going to be about, yeah, this is a really happy little community, and whoever it is helps keep it safe. But the question is, what's the cost to others to keep this community what it is? And we didn't get that story, and I was very happy with the story we got. But I do think, like, at some point, I would love to see, like, going back to Under the Empire, like, what was life like for more of those planets where things were mostly running pretty well and the people were pretty happy, and they may have thought about like, oh, we don't want these, agitators rocking the boat, as people who are comfortable under Empire will generally say about the folks who are not so happy.
Mm-hmm. It would be interesting to see something like that.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's been explored in some of the books. So you get to pretend to be Alex here for a moment. Criscano also writes, Alex, I have a theory on why the ship was so ready to go. So this is because I think Alex was talking about finding it weird.
Yeah, he criticized the ship.
Yeah. And Criscano says, I'm a flight paramedic on a helicopter. And I can tell you that A, we trust our mechanics 100% with keeping our aircraft ready to go at a moment's notice. And to that end, we always fill the tanks when we get back to base after a mission, so they're ready for the next mission. If SM-33 and the previous captain were expected to have to book it off at the snap of a finger, they may have made sure in advance that the ship was ready to go.
That's a good point. First of all, really cool job. Thank you for sharing that with us. That's cool.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's a great point. I always love insight from people who actually live in that aspect of the real world. Because
Mhm.
yeah, I don't know shit about planes. Like my sister's a pilot. She flies for Sun Country, but I don't know that stuff. Like, but yeah, that's a great point. Just how they probably did have that ship kind of prepped and ready. And based on the captain's logs that we saw later in the show,
Mhm.
I think that's 100% true. Is he had the plan to like go in and come back out,
Right.
and just something went wrong. Which I also liked that we never fleshed out what went wrong,
Yeah.
other than like the idea of mutiny.
Yeah, I think you're right. 'Cause sometimes it's fun just to keep mysteries alive and to not really know all the details. But I also say, like, I'm the kind of person who, if I check my cruising rate, if my gas thing is on, but I know that I can get about 10 more miles out of my car and my home is 7 miles away, I used to be the kind of person who would be like, all right, well, I'll just get home and tomorrow, filling up the tank is going to be tomorrow Matthew's problem. And then tomorrow, Matthew is a procrastinator and says, I will get in my car when I have exactly 10 minutes to go 10 minutes, and then realize, oh no, I have to put more gas in my car.
Yep.
What the hell was yesterday Matthew doing? So yes, this idea of not only do you have a cool job, you have a good perspective, because this idea of keep the thing fueled up for the emergency in the future, maybe a lesson I could learn. So good on that.
You're right. Honestly, that's a lesson I've had to learn too, especially when it's butt cold here in Minnesota this past week and a half. Like I'm talking -15, like
We
actual
are on
temperature,
Hoff right
guys,
now, my
not
friend.
wind chill. Yeah,
there's dead
it's
compounds
not.
on the roads.
It's not good. And every day my car starts is a miracle. And yesterday I was low on gas and I was like, I think that's going to be tomorrow Erin's problem. And I stopped myself. I said, it's going to be colder in the morning. So then
Yeah.
I did it yesterday.
Yeah, I haven't gone out for a couple days, in part because I know I have to fuel out my car and I don't want to do that in this weather. So
It's so cold.
yeah, when DoorDash can come bring someone to fuel my car, let me know. And then also he thanked us each for a couple of things that apparently made him laugh out loud. From Alex, it was, oh my God, Max Rebo is Neil's dad, which I am sad to say we've officially gotten word on what race, what species Neil is, and it's not the same species as Max Rebo. So that theory dies a hard death, but they are both perhaps of the elephant genus somehow. From
Neil
me, it was
Rebo.
for me it was Shot Trunk Wedding, which thank you, I am quite proud of that one. And apparently, Eliza, aka Erin, aka Today the Real Good Guys, he quite enjoyed your phrase, the historical documents, and immediately picked up that was a Galaxy Quest reference, which I appreciate as well. So, well done.
Do you want to know something crazy?
You had no idea that that's a Galaxy Quest reference?
I have no idea what Galaxy Quest is.
Okay. Well, we're
And I'm
having
so
a movie
sorry.
next sometime soon. Galaxy Quest is both. It is specific to Star Trek, but it could apply to a lot of this. One of the best both parodies, but also love letters to fandom. To hardcore.
Oh, okay. So is it like Spaceballs, but like actually a love letter and not just like making fun of?
Yeah. It's
Okay.
it's about very short version. It's about the crew of a TV show like Star Trek who get pulled into a real life version of it. And
that's
part of the
awesome.
idea is that they meet these aliens who don't understand the concept of fiction. And so they got all these broadcasts of the Star Trek show and referred to them as historical documents. So, yes. Great
That's
show.
great.
Great
That's
show.
awesome. Well, just take that out. No, I knew exactly what I was doing.
Exactly. All right, we have two last comments, then we're going to have our member section. Of course, you can become a member for only $5 a month, $55 a year. We have our bonus section for members coming up at the end of the month. We're going to be continuing our book club. This month, we're going to be talking about just the books in general and why we find the Star Wars books add so much to the canon and to our enjoyment of it all, including some of the books from earlier canons as well, EU as well as Disney canon. But all the information is in our show notes. But for now, let's get back to the two more comments from Andy Nelson, who's one of the podcastissimos who runs all of this. He writes, I finished watching it last night, and I have to say it was a ton of fun. Great group of kids, and Jude Law was perfect as the pirate. I wasn't thrilled that the supervisor ended up being a big computer. But in the scope of things, I think it was a bit of an easy way out because it would be harder to like Jod had it been a person that he'd actually killed. And we've never really seen essentially droids controlling everything before, so it seemed a bit of an anomaly. And like you, Matthew, I wish there was a bit more at the end. I get it, it's the kid's story, and we end with a successful end of a big adventure, but in the scope of things, I could have used a little something more. That being said, I was still satisfied with what we got. So this was a comment Alex and I had brought up, that we kind of wanted a little bit more of an epilogue of like seeing where everyone is, a week or two or a couple months after this. Did you have any of that same feeling?
I mean, no. Like, yes and no. Like, part of me wants it, but I also did not expect it in the show.
Yeah.
Like, I didn't think that they would do an epilogue. I kind of thought they would just kind of tie it off and leave it as they did. So I wasn't disappointed or felt like something was lacking when we didn't get more.
That's fair.
But I always do love a little follow-up. So I mean, part of me is still hoping that they do like a comic book of like the setup of Atten or something like that.
Yeah.
I will agree about the droid stuff. I mean, that's something my dad said too. He's like, really? It's just a droid? And then when he stabbed it with the lightsaber, he's like, no fucking way it's that easy to kill. Like, no way. Like, that's bull. But one thing I loved was that Farrah knew it was a droid. Like,
Mhm.
everyone knows it's a droid. Because
Yeah.
in my head, I kind of was thinking, well, if they're being controlled by a droid, then like it's got to be this kind of Wizard of Oz level veil of secrecy. You think it's somebody, but it's not.
Mhm.
But no, Farrah was like, yeah, for sure, it's a droid. Like, duh, he knows
Yeah.
best. And that was just interesting to see how far into the system she kind of was. Whether it's
Yeah.
good or bad, she just truly didn't see a single problem,
Yeah.
and was
Yeah,
just
it's
so
just
excited for Fern to go meet this giant droid.
right? Yeah, it's just what you always knew. And
Mhm.
it's funny because and I'll admit my feelings on this were exacerbated by the fact that, like, I literally paused the watch of that last episode so that I could be on the phone with my healthcare company trying to sort something out, and I got stuck in one of those phone trees where it feels like
Oh God.
nothing you say is actually being listened to, and you can't actually get to talk to someone. And so the whole time the parents were trying to explain things to the droids, and the droids were just like the security droids were just not listening and just repeating the same information and acting like they were so helpful. I was like,
Mhm.
I get your frustration right now. This is very real.
Yeah. You're like, I'm
So
there.
last comment comes from Riki, the co-host over on Superhero Ethics, but who's also been on a lot of great Star Wars content. He writes, a satisfying conclusion to a good show. The VFX looked not great, but especially for a lot of the hover. The VFX, the special effects, looked not great, but especially for a lot of the hoverbike scenes, which is weird because nighttime scenes have traditionally been used to hide VFX, but in this case, the suburban glow perhaps showed too much. Like Erin, I had a theory that Renaud would be the supervisor, but even in episode 7, that started to look less likely, and the whole automated control started to seem like where we were going. I have questions. Why didn't anyone in the Empire know about this planet? But it's fine for this to not be explained right now. They've left a door wide open for a good season 2 with Jod unaccounted for. Also hoping that the pirate Vane survives and he just becomes this recurring joke where every crew he joins gets wrecked.
Every crew Jod joins.
Every crew Vane joins. Oh, I guess I think was Jod, right?
Who's Vane?
Let me look that up. Hold on. Oh yeah, okay. So Vane, just to remind people, was the Nikto, the guy with kind of like a leathery looking face and horns, who was on the I think he's the same species as Hondo Anaka. Certainly a lot of people who worked for him. And he was kind of the second command once Jod took over.
Yes. Yeah. Hondo
Yes, I think
Anaka's
that
a
would be a fun
Weequay,
running joke
not
if
a
he just
Nikto, but that would be a great joke.
yes. Yeah.
I will say I'm a little bit bummed that Blurb died because I was looking forward to that glowweed farm. I wanted
Blurb
to
was
know
really
what that
fun.
meant.
Yeah, yeah. I think that there was a lot of fun little guys like that, Like most of that pirate crew survived. So I think we're gonna
Yeah,
get to some more.
Icona, she was a baddie.
She was fun.
I
She was fun.
appreciated the kind of Pacific Islander theme that she had.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I
Yeah,
think
I
it
think
would
it's a
be
lot.
fun to see this crew.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I think it'd be fun to see this crew. I think it'd be fun to see more of the pirate code. Certainly Smee 33 is one that I want to
Mhm.
see come back a lot. So yeah. I think overall a great show that just left us a lot of good things to talk about.
Yeah, I definitely want a Pirates comic. I want to know about Tack Renard. Please.
Yeah.
Please. Like,
Yeah.
I appreciate that it was mysterious, but also now the show's over. Spill the beans. What species is he? I want to know.
Yeah. Well, we
Uh,
already know that one of the books we're getting next year is gonna pick up some more of the Acolyte story. So
oh, okay.
I think that the idea of that things that are introduced in TV and either where we're not going to get into all the reasons why Acolyte got canceled and maybe it'll get saved, but whatever it is, for shows where it leaves a lot more questions than it answers, then I think the books and comic books and things like that are going to be a really good place to see that explored.
Yeah.
Well, all right. Well, thank you so much, Erin, for being a part of this. Thank you much to our listeners for writing in with your thoughts and feedback. Please remember to keep doing that. We love feedback. We're going to be spending the next couple of months going over a lot of fun things as we get ready for Andor kicking off in May. And if you're a member, of course, stick around. We're doing our next story in the story archive from a certain point of view. For everybody else, thank you so much. We have spoken.
I promise I'll watch Galaxy Quest. Stay classy, Atten.